This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and today I'm going to be continuing my coverage of the fourth round of the 2011 U.S. Championship in a game between Ray Robson and Daniel Naroditsky. And Ray Robson, both of them are just up-and-coming prodigies in the chess scene. And Naroditsky, who's only an international master, but playing in the U.S. Championship because I'm sure he was invited because he's, I think he's about 15 or 16 years old, and he's 2,400. So definitely a promising player. And here we enter the Sicilian, and with knight f6 and a6, bishop g5. So black is going into the Najdorf here, and bishop g5 by Robson, one of the most aggressive lines against the Sicilian, against the Najdorf. Also seen as bishop c4. Definitely a very aggressive line. Bishop e2 is also possible. h3 has become recently popular, and even a4. Not to mention the lines involving bishop e3 in the English attack. So a lot of choices here, and Robson goes into bishop g5's very thoroughly analyzed line, and it's very complicated. It's very aggressive for white, and I guess you don't see it at the top level so much because players are usually armed with computer analysis about 30 moves deep into a forced draw or whatnot. So knight bd7, and Naroditsky plays something. Okay, so queen e2, most likely intending some kind of g3 and bishop g2 line, possibly g4 and f4 as well. And so Naroditsky plays, kind of a tricky move order, I guess you could say. Queen c7, and now it looks like, well, if white played knight d5 after knight takes, pawn takes. Now he's got a great clamp on the center. It's going to be very tough for black to develop, but queen a5 check, a nice little tactic, and black's going to pick up the pawn. So that's not going to work out. So that's the reason. Usually players play queen. Usually e6 is played a little bit earlier, but a little tactical nuance, and castles queenside. So with f4, standard move, e5's in the air, f5 is in the air to weaken e6, and thus black's control d5, and bishop e7. And so after g3, this is kind of a positional. It's kind of a weird choice by Robson in this position, because this was in round 4, and I would expect something more aggressive, trying to pick up some points on Naroditsky. I believe he's the lowest rated player in the entire tournament. And g3 is kind of a positional idea. I don't know. So after bishop h4, the idea being to force rook g8 so that black can continue with g5. And so now he trades the bishop now that black can't castle. And after bishop h3, maybe white's angling for some kind of bishop sacrifice on e6. Maybe he wants to play f5 and try to squeeze a knight into d5. So either way, knight b6 is going to threaten coming to, definitely better than knight c5, threatens coming to knight c4, and also maybe protecting the d5 square. So after white plays f5, now black can play e5, and he doesn't have to worry about a knight coming into d5 just yet. The downside of black's position here, so on the upside, he's got the two bishops, and okay, he can't, he's got the two bishops, and maybe a knight can come to c4 or queen c4. But on the downside, black's position is kind of difficult. So it's kind of like both players aren't very happy in this position, because black has the two bishops, but he has no space to use them, and the position is closed. He also has a backwards pawn on d6, and it's tough for him to develop the bishops to being effective. Maybe bishop goes to c6, maybe goes to g5, but it's just kind of a difficult position to play. On the flip side, white has a very bad bishop on h3. It's on the same colors as pawns, never a good thing, restricting its mobility. And white it seems kind of tough for him to have a decent plan here. So now bishop d7, and black really wants to open the position up so these bishops can breathe. And for white, it's just tough for both sides. I mean, it's tough to be constructive. So white obviously put pressure on that d6 pawn, forcing more or less bishop e7, and now knight a5, which is a weird move. Now the idea is to defend the c4 square for white, but the knight is obviously loosely placed on a5, and it just seems kind of a weird plan by Robson. The whole thing just seems kind of strange. I mean, what's the bishop doing on h3? White really can't take advantage of the d5 square, and rook c8 by black. So he wants to get counterplay along the c file and take advantage of white's dubiously placed knight on the edge of the board, and the king is very safe in the middle. The downside is that black's kingside rook on g8 is going to be out of the game for a while. So now here, knight b3, this seemed kind of forced by the complications, and bishop b5. So black is starting to find some good squares for his pieces, and if somehow maybe he could transfer the bishop to d8 and possibly to b6, he'd have a good game. He'd be controlling a lot of squares going across the center of the board. So instead, bishop f6 now, and the idea is that well, I guess he prevents some, you know, the idea of white playing f6 himself. Let's say he played a5. Well, then f6 is going to just drop an exchange, and white's going to have a very comfortable game, probably winning. So that's I suppose that's the idea with bishop f6. And now rook e1, trying to consolidate and protect the pieces in the center. King e7. So now black has solved the problem of his kingside rook, and he's also defending the center with his king. So bishop f1, and Naroditsky declines to trade because he doesn't want to. You know, first of all, that would lose the advantage of the two bishops by trading, and white has just such a bad bishop on f1. Why trade it? And so instead, put pressure on the center. Just makes sense. Knight a5, and now rook d8. And now I think Robson should go into a position. He should go into an opposite colored bishop in game, or not an in game, opposite colored bishops, where it's going to be very tough for black to win. And I don't really know about playing pawn takes, because it just drops a pawn, and white's gonna, you know, let's just say rook a8, and now the bishop is gonna be very safe along this diagonal and attacking. So I don't think that's gonna happen. So I think if knight takes c6, queen takes, and this just seems a draw. I mean, this is a draw. So I understand Robson doesn't want to play for a draw, but I just don't see anything else in this position. I mean, he can't. It's going to be very difficult to attack on the king side by pushing the pawns, and it's going to be very difficult to gain space on the queen side. It's really just going to weaken his king more than anything else. So after bishop c4, I think he was just pushing for too much. Now both players are around 5 or 6 minutes at this point in the game, so they're getting pretty low on time. After bishop a4, now b3, and now almost all of white's pawns are on light squares. Not a good sign for his bishop. Black has the same problem, more or less, with his bishop on f6, but at least it has prospects, you know, if the position opens up in the future. And after b5, black is, this just seems too comfortable. h4 to prevent the bishop from coming to g5, and now c4. And maybe, I don't know, I mean, I guess Robson was extremely low on time here. I think he had about a minute left, and Naroditsky had about 5. So Robson, I think, just kind of lost the thread of the game in the time pressure. And so now after rook a8, I don't know, it's going to be pretty tough. So a little tactical shot gets the knight out, but black is able to counter. You know, I don't know what happened here. I mean, it just seems the knight is just stranded on a5, so knight c4 the only way to save it. And now black is going to achieve a decisive penetration on the a file, and it's going to be very tough for black to get out of this, or for white to get out of this rather. So now rook c8, and black's heavy pieces doing some serious work on the a and c files. Bishop c2, and bishop e7 to defend. Rook d5, trying to gain some, you know, maybe some idea of some threats. Now it just, you know, he loses an exchange. He sacrificed a pawn, trying to open the position up, and king d2. So it just seems it's a very difficult position. So yes, the forcing a queen trade. So you always want to trade when you're up material. It's going to make it a lot easier to realize realize your advantage and convert it to a win by trading pieces. And just because now it's really going to highlight black is up in exchange. And if you count the pawns, white has 4 pawns against black's 6 pawns. So he's down 2 pawns, but he does have control of the white squares. So maybe he can have some faint hopes of holding the endgame, as black has an absolutely terrible bishop on e7. But I don't know. Down in exchange, down exchange with 2 pawns. It's going to be even tougher. So black just needs to activate his pieces, get this bishop out, maybe start making some threats, and it shouldn't be too tough to realize the advantage. So now, yes, white has a fantastic knight on f5, but what does it really matter? Black is he's got some pieces working together, and white is also tied down, defending that pawn on g3. Black just needs to get his king out. I mean, even if the king's got to go towards the queen side to get active or to penetrate the position, once the king gets active, it's going to be all over. And so coming up now, black he didn't even need to. He didn't even need to spend the time. He just wins a pawn. And now the game's pretty much over. I mean, this pawn on d5 for white is probably not going anywhere. And white tries to hold on. I mean, he's just down too much material. So he does get a lot of counterplay, but what can he do? So now he's losing a couple pawns. Naroditsky played the endgame very well. Put a lot of pressure on white, a lot of very forcing moves. And in this position, Robson resigned. And this was a pretty big game because Robson almost he got 3rd place. I believe he was a half point out of qualifying for a playoff with Yuri Shulman in 2nd place to move on to the semifinals. And I mean, this was an important game for sure. I mean, Robson would have loved to get away with this with a win. So loss here, very, very pivotal. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net. Thanks for tuning in.